Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be, and welcome to the Groovy Podcast. My name is Ken Kousen, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and as always, I am joined by
Baruch Sadogursky, podcasting from Sunnyvale, California.
It looks like we actually got something vaguely resembling spring after all this time. Looked like we had gone directly from winter to summer, but today we actually have a nice day out. How about you?
This is great. Now, for us, it's all California, so
Yeah,
no
right.
complaints. No
Yeah.
complaints.
Hardly fair to even bring that up for somebody out where you are. Yeah, we've had just a monstrous winter, and then suddenly it went into the 90s, and
Wow.
now it's actually a decent day out. So it's about time. Of course, I was last week. Last week might have been the week before. I was actually in India, in Bangalore, for GIDS, that Great Indian Developer Summit.
Yes.
Have you been to that before?
No, I actually never been to India at all.
Seriously? There's somewhere in the world I've been that you have not?
I guess there are more places, for example, Marlborough, Connecticut.
Yeah, well, that one don't go out of your way. You're not missing a lot. Although you are, of course, welcome if you ever wind up in the Hartford area. The good old insurance capital of the world, as they say. No, it's a huge conference there. It's like 5,000 people, 5,000 attendees, and it's big among the no fluff, just stuff speakers. I mean, there must have been about 7 or 8 current or former no fluff speakers at this conference. It's just a lot of hours in the plane getting to Bangalore. So it was really nice to visit everybody out there. I actually gave a Groovy talk as well, which was nice. That's glad that they scheduled that at a Groovy one and a Gradle one. I don't recall any Grails talks at the moment, but it's primarily a Java conference, so not a big surprise.
Okay.
So should we dive in, or do you want to say where you're off to next? Oh, you're going to Devox, right, or not?
No, I'm. We have our own user conference, JFrog user conference, the Swamp Up next week.
Right. Yeah, your Swamp Up is next week, right? Okay, well, we'll talk about that later then. I'm going to give you a chance to push that if you like.
Yeah, and speaking about conferences, I'm just going to add it to our show notes. Going a little bit meta, in the beginning of June, I think June the 5th and the 6th, there will be developer experience conference, DevExCon, in San Francisco, in which I will talk about using podcasts for developer relations, and it will feature Groovy podcast as well. So yeah, I will mention that and expect doubling the audience from like 4 to 8.
You sure you want to use this one as an example? I mean, there's issues there, but okay.
Yeah. So I will use 3 examples. I will use our Russian IT podcast, which is unbelievably popular. We have around 12,000 downloads every episode.
Wow.
I have no idea what happened and how it got there. And I will use the Groovy podcast as an example of what you can do in a very low production effort and still get those 4 listeners every week. And I will talk about the DevRel radio, just going meta and speaking about developer relations podcast in a developer relations conference.
Well, that old saying about from Hollywood, from William Goldman, who wrote The Princess Bride and everything, he always says nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, we'll be the opposite of the popular podcast. I can deal with that. Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure which one has less listeners, the Groovy podcast or the DevRel radio.
I would put the money on us, but we'll see how it goes. As long as we're talking about conferences, by the way, of course, the thing that's coming up that everybody's looking forward to is Great Conf in Copenhagen.
Yes,
Great Conf. It's
the
anniversary. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that looks very exciting. That looks like a lot of fun. I will not be there. Will you be? You'll be at that one though, right?
No, I unfortunately will be in Vox Day, Singapore on those days. So
Oh, okay. So we're going to have somebody from GreatConf report on that for us. We'll have to
yes.
see who we can interview. I expect, well, I don't want to make any assumptions until I look at the speaker list, but I'm sure we can grab somebody who will attend it and let us know. We still want to make sure that we get Paul King on the podcast at some point, and it's so hard when he's basically on the other side of the planet. But if he's in Copenhagen, I mean, I know he's going to be, I think he's going to be in Minneapolis for GreatConf US. But if he's going to be in Copenhagen, maybe we can grab him, you know, because we have a lot of questions about the future of Groovy that he's probably the best person to answer. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we have to record his answer to the topics that we discussed with Guillaume and Cedric at Devox Friends. And I think we'll agree that he will be the right person to answer some of the concerns that were raised there.
So that's coming soon. We'll get that taken care of. If not before, we'll get it taken care of. That's the dates on that. I've got it on the show notes here.
June 1st.
No, May 30th and June 1st. Right, May 30th, yes. 31st, and June 1st, I believe. So in Copenhagen. Excellent. Now let's dive into news, if you don't mind.
Yes, let's do that.
So in terms of stable versions of the latest releases, Groovy 2.4.5 seems to be the latest stable version, but 2.5.0 release candidate 2 came out either yesterday or the day before. And with the release, even Paul himself mentioned that the final version is on the way. So it's not like there's going to be a whole series of release candidates. I get the feeling they're just, you know, putting it through its paces, checking the bugs and everything, and it'll be out very, very soon. Of course, the biggest feature, we'll talk about it when it's released, but the biggest new feature, from what I understand, from 2.5 will be the addition of the macro methods. I talked a little bit about that in the article that I put together for Java Magazine. Of course, everything I said was based on the work from Sergey
Yegorov.
Yegorov, yes. He's the one who did really all the effort on that. Other members of the Groovy team too, but he led that effort. And if I got anything right in the article, it's because of him and the release notes, you know. But the basic idea, for those who are not aware, is that macro methods make it easier to write AST transforms, because you can write a method as though it was regular Groovy and put annotations on it, and then that will transform it into the appropriate builder code for the AST transform itself. So it makes the process of creating an AST transform much less tedious, much more easy or efficient. So as such, it's not a huge change for developers' lives in general, but it will make people who focus on AST transforms pretty happy, I would think.
Yeah, that's true. And this is something that I think Sergey wrote 2 years ago, 3 years ago, long time ago. And it was released first as a library with extension methods that you could use. And then it was incorporated to be released with Groovy 2.5 for a very, very long time from now.
Yeah, we had him as a guest on the podcast a while ago talking about that, and it's good to see that finally come into fruition.
Yes.
I think 2.5 may also use the new parrot parser.
Yes, that's what I know as well. Yep.
Yeah, so I don't know whether that means, I don't think it'll have the Java 8 syntax support yet. I think that's for 3, but it will have the new parrot parser in there.
I think the idea is that you can use a 2.5 with Java 7 and 8, I think, and 3 only with Java 8 and higher.
Right. See, 3.0, which, by the way, 3.0 is now Alpha 2. So that's
Yes.
coming. That's the one that's going to require Java 8 and support all the Java 8 syntax. And then the 2.6 was for the people who want the Java 8 support but are still stuck on Java 7. So that's kind of a hybrid. That one's at Alpha 3 right now. I don't expect that one. I don't think anybody expects that one to be in the marketplace for a great length of time. My sense, by the way, is, of course, the Java community is moving on to 8, 9, 10 anyway. So hopefully 3 will be out before, what's it? The latest I heard was just before the end of the year. It's been very vague as to the actual release date on that.
Yeah, and then going back to the discussion I had with Guillaume and Cedric about the resources that uh, we as a community have to work on Groovy language, which
Yeah,
is
the
basically
big issue there, again, for those people who may have missed a podcast, right, is that when you run Gradle on Java 9 or 10, then you get these ugly warnings about illegal reflective access. And it's all coming from the Groovy jar file. So it's now the illegal quote reflective access is there because of the modularization system, and Groovy is doing reflection in order to cache a lot of things to help performance. So all the changes they've done to improve performance have this downside of requiring them to use reflection in a way that the JVM is no longer happy about. Now, Gradle still works just fine. I've been using it under Java 10 now for, well, I mean, pretty much since it came out in March. So I've been using it pretty heavily and haven't had any problems. But those warnings are scary, and they make people worried. And the hope is that something will be done in the Groovy community to eventually remove those, because eventually the warnings will become errors. You know, you won't be able to do it anymore.
exactly.
And when we talk
Exactly.
to, well, when you talk to Cedric and Guillaume, the answers were still very much in the, well, we're thinking about it phase and haven't made any decisions yet. But it sounds like Paul King would be the definitive person to answer those questions.
Yeah, and more so the answers not only where we're thinking about it, the answers where we don't really know what to do. We have a bad solution that will hurt performance badly. We know how to do that, and eventually if no one will come with a better solution and also with the resources to implement the better solution, we are going to for this default, which is going to hurt the performance of Groovy runtime badly.
So we'll see how that plays out, because there's a lot of uncertainty there. I got the feeling that neither of them were directly involved in these decisions in an active way. I mean, of course, Guillaume is involved, but Guillaume, is very heavily invested in Google right now, and Google I/O is this week too. So I'm
Yes.
sure he's just very busy with that stuff. And of course, Cedric works for Gradle, and Gradle is working very hard on their new versions plus their Kotlin DSL, which isn't out yet, not in 1.0, will probably be out. I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm just blindly guessing. We have at least another quarter before that comes out. So probably third quarter before that's really usable. And then we'll have to see what that does to the Groovy ecosystem, if anything. Now,
Yes.
on the plus side, by the way, sorry, just to mention, on the plus side, Guillaume Laforge did post a tweet just the other day, yesterday, day before, saying statistics-wise, there were 19 million downloads of Groovy in the first quarter of this year, which is over twice as many as the same time period a year ago. This always takes people by surprise, because who was it that referred to Groovy as a market-free language? It's like there's no marketing. Who said that? I forget.
You speak a lot about the problem of perception, and this goes exactly that. And we have more news even on today's discussion, which prove your point, right? So, for example, the article about the state of Java in 2018. That's another very very interesting article that shows Groovy as being the most popular JVM language after Java. And the next sentence after this very very convincing infographics speaks about how Kotlin is the big winner of the year, when it clearly not even close. So yeah, so that's the perception problem that we have, and I guess it's not going away.
Well, and I got a comment, by the way, on I have to make a comment on that particular survey. The survey is linked in the show notes. It was called State of Java 2018. The It's not exactly a person who runs it, it's more of a company kind of thing. They go under the, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Beldung or whatever, Baeldung. And that group, I mean, what did they do? They post tips and tricks on Java and Spring. They spent a lot of time talking about new features in Spring and how to use them. So they ran this survey, and as part of the survey, they decided to throw in a few questions about alternative languages. And of course, as we saw, Groovy wound up ahead of all of them on that. I remember Ryan Vanderwerf retweeted that survey, was trying to get more people. And they did mention something about getting several thousand people filling out the survey, so that you think there's some validity to the numbers. The thing that was weird, though, is that this adoption of Spring was enormous, especially Spring 5 was huge. And some people seem to be surprised by it. I even saw a retweet by Rod Johnson himself, the creator of this, the original creator of the Spring framework, saying, wow, this is surprisingly large. But of course it's large. It was coming from a group that markets Spring, that markets training classes and tips in Spring. It's such a self-selective, skewed audience. If it wasn't huge in Spring, then they're not doing a good job. So I mean,
yeah, no, it's the internet survey of how many people use the internet.
Right. I mean, it's a highly skewed audience. Now, that said, the fact that Java was very heavily adopted in version 8, again, was not a big surprise, and people hadn't really moved to 9 or 10 much. But the other thing that having a high Spring adoption will do to your audience is it's going to skew things in favor of Maven. You notice that Maven was somewhere in the 70s of percentages, and Gradle was only down in the 20s, and he was commenting on this like it was significant. Well, you and I know that there's a couple people on the Spring Boot team. I don't remember the actual names, but there's a couple people who just loathe Gradle,
And just love, and love Maven. Yep.
Yeah, and therefore, if you go to the Spring Starter, if you go to start.spring.io and you create a new Spring Boot project, the dropdown defaults to Maven. Every other thing they have in there is alphabetical, but not that one. That default. Well, maybe I'm wrong about that, but they definitely try to push you toward Maven for Spring. So again, a Spring heavy audience is certainly going to skew toward Maven. Now, I haven't seen anything from the Gradle people about that, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, and generally it's actually the same with Kotlin as well. So Spring team members, they being pretty passionate advocates of Kotlin recently, and they do look at Josh Long, for example, who is very, very passionate about Kotlin, and others, and they do a lot of work of integration. It took them like 10 years to come up with Groovy DSL for beans configuration, and even then they just copied what Grails has, but it took them half a year to come with the Kotlin one, which looks and feels exactly like Groovy, but maybe a little bit more powerful. So they are very passionate about Kotlin, and this is one of the results. Again, one of the reasons why they see the high numbers in this survey.
Now, there was one interesting thing I did find in that survey, and that was the IDE adoption, because they showed that IntelliJ actually exceeded these days by a substantial margin. They actually said it grew from 45.8 up to 55.4 among their skewed audience, and that Eclipse had dropped down to about 38%. And the reason I find that significant, of course, is that the Spring people have Spring Tool Suite, which is an Eclipse-based tool. So if you really are seeing that much adoption of IntelliJ, it must be at least that or larger. So that does seem to be something I would put significance in.
Yeah, no, I mean that's true for all of that. We can take all the, I would say, all the winners and separate them thanks to their screwed audience or despite that, right? So it's true for Maven, right? So despite the Spring Boot defaults to Maven. Gradle has a nice number in there, and despite all the publicity that Kotlin gets from Spring Team, Groovy is still first, right? And we can only think that probably in general population of developers, the gap is even bigger.
Well, and I don't want to come across as resentful or anything. This is just fact of life in our community, and we're basically used to it by now. But there are some things to be learned, and as you saw, there's some good statistics there. Now, back on the Groovy ecosystem, the Grails people have released 3.3.5 now. So it's an incremental update. Nothing dramatic yet. I'm not sure when 3.4 will be coming out still. So Grails at this point is looking pretty stable at the moment. Is that the sense you get also?
Yes, and that's interesting because we both know that there are a lot of people who are actually working on Grails code base in OCI. Right, so it's a very large team. Some of them are obviously consultants that take care of OCI's profits directly, but there are also a lot of people who contribute to Grails code base, and so it's definitely not a stagnation. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and while we're jumping around, of course, one of the things that happens with Grails is that OCI is supporting the development of both those getting started guides as well as training. Some of those training classes are free, as a matter of fact. So I did add them under the conference section. I just didn't have another section to add them. There's a nice intro to Grails security that our good friend Sergio Delamo will be running. A 2-day online workshop at OCI. I don't think that one's free. Actually, it might be like $50. I mean, it's a not minimal cost if you could do it. I really kind of wish I could take that. Unfortunately, I'm not free those days, and I think it's May. I got to put the dates in there, but I think it's 17 and 18, something like that. I'm checking the link right now, but one of the biggest. It's May 17th and 18th, and it's online on that and. Oh, it's $100. So just checking. But there's that. It's 2 half days. It's 3 hours each day. And of course, I believe even after all these years, Spring Security is still the #1 most used plugin in the Grails ecosystem, which for good reasons. I mean, it's an enterprise quality plugin, and this would be a great way to get up to speed on the details of that plugin, everything with authentication, authorization, testing, LDAP security, REST, all that stuff, all built in there.
Yep.
OCI is also doing, by the way, since we mentioned Groovy, they're also having Paul King himself do an online Groovy 2.5 update. And I mean, they wouldn't be having that update going on if 2.5 wasn't about to be released. And I think the update is on a week later, like the 25th. And I think that would give us pretty good evidence that Grails or Groovy 2.5 will be released by then.
Yeah, and this is just like I think that's just a free webinar that all of us and all of you, our 4 listeners, should definitely attend.
Speaking of the Grails guides, the latest ones, and I say latest in a rather broad sense. We don't tend to deliver our podcast as frequently as we'd like to, but some of the ones that have been released since our last podcast is they now have a demonstration of using OAuth in Twitter with Grails 3 and Spring Security REST. There's one on doing a logical delete in Gorm. Logical delete meaning you don't actually delete something, you just mark something as deleted, so it provides an audit trail and all that. There's a monitoring tool called Java Melody. I've heard of it. I've never actually used it. They've got a getting started guide with that. And then, of course, the one that I expect to be very popular, Zach Klein, our good friend Zach, has put together a getting started guide on using Vue.js with Grails. So he tends to do a lot of their front end work. I know he's put together guides on Angular and on React, and this is to commit, to fulfill the trio there, the Vue one that's become very popular in the past time frame, whatever it is. It's been growing rather rapidly.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the Grails stuff. Anything else Grails related that you're aware of, or we're good on that?
No, not that there are good stuff. Other good stuff on the news items. So, for example, the one that I kind of very like is the Picocli.
Oh yeah.
which is a library for command line, and it was being challenged. Um, I think for many years. Good CLI library. There are some options. One of them, I think, written by Kosuke Kawagachi, the creator of Jenkins, very long time ago. The other is Apache Common CLI, which is just horrible. And Pico CLI is a sane, I would say, is a sane library, and Groovy support there is really exciting and nice.
Yeah, I mean, Groovy's got a CLI builder, which is at
Yeah,
least decent, and this one goes well beyond that. And there's a
yeah,
nice little
yes.
what is the
CLI
title?
builder is pretty basic, so having a full library actually
Yeah,
helps.
the title of the blog post says Groovy scripts on steroids, and they talk about ANSI colors and styles and very important tab auto completion, type conversions, parser tracing, all kinds of stuff. And the examples actually use @graph, so you don't even have to install much ahead of time. And it looks very impressive. I haven't used command line stuff for that for a long time, but if I was going to, I'd definitely take a look at that.
But occasionally we write scripts with Groovy because Groovy is just great for that, and having the ability to add the CLI controls, this is just helpful.
Yeah, so definitely take a look at that if you have any notion of using anything CLI related. Let's see. Keegan Witt announced the release of 1.6.1 of GMaven Plus. So there's still, for people who want to use Groovy with Maven, there's a tool for that. I looked through the release notes. There wasn't any, everything was still backward compatible. There were no breaking changes or anything like that. So I'd say that's probably a very stable product. And they're just adding new features at this point. So that if
So
you really,
from what I understand, GMaven is used twofold. First of all, it includes the plugin for Maven,
mm,
file and run Groovy, and the other is it supports the ability to write POM XMLs in Groovy
okay.
and
So
Groovy DSL.
which you just don't see very much of in the Maven community, but it's good that they have the support for that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think another option to achieve the same is using the Polyglot Maven extension
Mm,
from the company that Jason Van Zyl, the original author of Maven, um, runs now. I try to recall the name. Takiri is the name of the company. They have a bunch of extensions for Maven, and Polyglot Maven is one of them. So it includes the ability to write POM XMLs in various scripting languages, in and DSLs for various languages, including Groovy. But GMaven did that way before, and I think it still works. I have to say I didn't touch it for a really long time.
yeah, I played with GMaven way back when I was writing
Yeah.
the Making Java Groovy book. But I mean, GMaven Plus wasn't even available at that point, and of course, a lot of things have changed since then. If I had to do Groovy with Maven, I would certainly look at that library that they put together, the Keegan's put together.
Mhm.
Speaking of libraries and frameworks and resources, there is now a repository called Awesome Groovy. This was done by, let's see, where's the author's name? It's okay. So he just has his username KDABIR. Let me see if I open that in a new tab, if I can find out his actual name. Kunal Dabir, if I'm
Mhm.
pronouncing it correctly.
Yep.
Kunal, yeah, and he's in Pune, in India. Put together a series, what he called a curated list of awesome Groovy libraries, frameworks, and resources, inspired by many of the other awesome star repositories. And he's got a collection at groovy.zeef.com as well. I'm not sure why, but there's tons of them there. The only downside to this whole thing, and this is something we're gonna have to fix, is that we're not mentioned. Nothing about the Groovy podcast in the staying up to date section. That would be nice.
Yeah, and I think that the good news about those awesome lists is that you just fire up and pull requests, and they're pretty much inclusive because the more the merrier.
Yeah, and he has a script, an awesome.groovy script, which allows you to go ahead and find out what repositories are there and what are the available libraries and all this stuff. Looks like a nice centralized location, and I think all we have to do is one of us needs to fork the repo and send them a pull request to say, by the way, I understand why you're not aware of this, but there is this thing called the Groovy Pod.
Yep, yeah. So I guess I will.
If he would they exclude us,
yep.
Probably not. I don't think we've done anything that he'd be unhappy about.
Not yet. I mean, we'll watch and see. But yeah, for now, I think we're good.
Certainly worth mentioning. Speaking of blog posts, Guillaume Laforge himself did a blog post about the 10-year anniversary of Google App Engine. And of course, shortly after Google App Engine was released with the Java little whitelist, that was one of those first situations where they didn't implement an entire version of Java, just implemented parts of it. And yet he created Gaelyk, Gaelyk, the library that allowed you to deploy a Groovy script onto Google App Engine, GAE for Google App Engine, of course. Now, of course, Guillaume works for Google. I'm sure you can use, Groovy on any of their App Engine related products now. What do they call it? Google Cloud Provider or something like that. They have their own cloud solution as well. I remember using that in the early days. I tried out Gaelyk a few times. I didn't do anything beyond simple programs, but just to demonstrate it worked. That was kind of fun. Then they lowered the usage limits to make the free tier so low I didn't want to do it anymore.
I actually tried it not very long time ago, maybe a year ago. So when we did this talk about extending the Amazon Alexa and Google Home, Google Assistant, actually, I wanted to use Groovy for writing those Google actions. Actually, did so. The backend of my Google action was a Groovy script running with Gaelyk on Google App Engine, and it works.
As another library that's I'd never heard of that just suddenly came out, there's a library called H2GIS, which is basically GIS, Graphical Information Services, geographic extensions to, of all things, the H2 database. I had no idea that H2 was used for anything other than testing, but there is a GitHub repository, Orbis GIS or whatever, GIS, that does these H2 GIS extensions to H2, and they very recently released a blog post where they showed how to use Groovy with that, how to write Groovy scripts and why you would and what you would use it for and everything. Looks very impressive, actually.
Yep, that's good news. By the way, just the benefits of trying to publicize our podcast and pushing it into various awesome lists. I just discovered that our website is down.
Our website?
Yes. I would say it's probably down for a year now, and no one just tried to ever browse it.
You mean the nofluffjuststuff.com/Groovy podcast?
Yes.
Okay, I will send an email to Ben at nofluffjuststuff and ask him about that. I remember trying it a while ago, and it was up. But a while ago was not recent. So
yeah, but you realize that since you tried it, and now no one ever tried to go to this website, and the only reason I did now is just I needed the link for the awesome Groovy list.
Yeah, let's not. That's too depressing to think about. So
yeah, no, those are the downsides of being popular.
Yeah, right. Except that at least the YouTube videos are always there, and the Podbean account is there, which means those people who subscribe to the podcast on, well, we used to call it an RSS feed, or anybody that's actually using a podcast reader should still be getting all of our podcasts. It was just nice to have.
I guess our website wasn't that useful.
I guess not. Yeah, I'll see if I can take care of that. Sigh, too bad. But at any rate, that H2GIS one looks to be very promising. I actually got to be a reviewer on a GIS book years ago by Scott Davis. talking about the open source tools for GIS. And that's when I learned that they have a term for people like me, the people whose GIS experience is using Google Maps. They say that we have red dot fever. Just putting red dots on a Google map. That's all it was. It's an amazingly deep field. Lots of things to learn and know about that. ArcGIS, I think, was the definitive tool there, and it's very, very powerful. They had an Android API. I'm not sure if they still have that around. I used to use Gradle with that. But of course, you always use Gradle with Android apps, because that was the definitive build tool. At any rate, this H2GIS looks to be very interesting if you happen to have an interest in geographical information systems. What else do we have here?
You up a little bit after the depressing news on our website. We actually have almost 450 subscribers on our YouTube channel.
Seriously?
Yes.
I wonder how many of them have actually watched a video. I guess we should. By the way, yesterday, to my surprise, I was looking at YouTube, just browsing around, because I subscribed to a bunch of things there, and it turned out that YouTube suggested that I watch this episode of the Night Hacking podcast, which was, hey, our long lost Dev Nexus, Groovy podcast back from February 1st. I'm like, hey, look at that. It's up. I had no idea. So I probably should have just shared the link, because the Night Hacking people were nice enough to let us use their equipment. But I was sufficiently annoyed that they hadn't even told us that it was there, that I just downloaded it and uploaded it to the Groovy podcast account.
No, I think it's fair enough, because when people go to our all 448 people expect all of our episodes to be on the channel.
Right. Like, let's do our own statistics and all that nonsense. But at any rate, that podcast had the interview with Andres Almire, much to his chagrin, I'm sure, which talked about Griffin-related issues and upcoming events and anything desktop related, as well as the fact that Griffin's going to be the reference implementation for one of the JCP JSRs now, right?
Yeah, this is so go watch this episode. There are very interesting developments on Java desktop development, and it includes Groovy interesting stuff. You just should watch or listen to this episode.
Yeah, always good to listen to Andres. Anyway, he also referred obliquely to that mystery person, El Groovissimo, who may certainly make an appearance at GreatConf again. If we hadn't had all those interruptions by some guy pushing coffee-related stuff, I think it would have been nice and simple,
Yeah, that's true. And speaking about popularity, I keep trying to cheer you up. I look at now at the download statistics at our Podbean account, and it looks very impressive. We have around 500 downloads per episode.
Really?
On a lot of them. Some of them are a little bit less, like 400s, but solid more than 500 for.
And you're not more than a third of those, right? That's
Yeah, no, my bot is I don't use it that heavily.
Okay, well, hey, all right, I'm happy. Hey, I'm happy if anybody's listening, and I know Sergio is, because he's the one who tells us if we haven't put one together for a long time. So that if we're just doing this for Sergio, that's okay with me, although we'll see. I mean, I'm sure we'll get some others. Okay, so I think that covered everything I had in there. We did put in a link to the latest Groovy Calamari, of course. But of course, what's coming, and this is I added a couple links in there. Again, I don't want to dwell on it, because this is going to be a huge thing when it's released, is the Micronaut framework. Graham, there's a link now both to a Jack Center article on Micronaut, and I put a link to the video where Graham did his keynote at Greach demonstrating Micronaut. I actually got a chance, I don't know if I told you, when I went to the No Fluff Just Stuff event in St. Louis, I was able to go a day early, and at OCI, I finally visited OCI, actually got to go there.
Oh.
And Graham and Jeff were doing a talk on Micronaut. They had just an event that day. So I got to see it in action. I got to see them actually put it through its paces and ask a bunch of questions and talk about that. They're still convinced that this is going to be complementary to things like Grails and Ratpack, that this is going to be very useful. I mean, for example, they've written their own dependency injection framework that uses minimal memory and minimal speed. I mean, the whole thing started up, like I say, in less than a second on the JVM, and used very little memory, in the tens of kilobytes, not megs, very, very small and fast. And the other thing that struck me, by the way, about Micronaut is how they have bundled into the framework things that you would normally associate with the cloud provider itself. Like they have the failover capabilities built in with some annotation. They have discovery and all to the framework. I mean, this is the stuff that when you're looking at Spring Boot, for example, you kind of ignore all that. And then when you go to the cloud provider, you worry about those issues.
Yes.
They're bundling it right into the framework. And this is the sort of stuff they say will then be something you could adopt inside, say, Grails 4 or whatever when that comes out, or Ratpack or what have you. Again, it's hard to talk about Micronaut in a serious way until the framework's actually out, so we get a chance to play with it. But the video's up there now, in case any of our listeners want to watch the video and see what's coming.
Yeah, I agree. This is very interesting. Looks promising. Interesting to see the relationship in this triangle of frameworks in the Groovy space. I think that Micronaut is kind of the answer of Grails to Ratpack, right? Because the Ratpack kind of positions itself being more lightweight than Grails. So here is one which is even more lightweight than Ratpack, and it's interesting.
I would have thought that, except that they insist, and again, I don't really know, but they insist that Ratpack and Micronaut are compatible rather than competitive, and we're going to have to talk to somebody in the Ratpack.
Yes. I would love to hear their take on that, because
it may be an excuse to get Dan Woods back on the podcast again, because it's been too long since we talked to him. But we may wait until the actual release happens. I wonder if it'll be out in time for GreatConf. We'll know soon enough, I suppose. So at any rate, that's everything. I think that's everything I had in the show notes as events that were going on. By the way, you have do you want to say anything about the developer advocate job that you're advertising for?
Yeah, so I'm still looking to expand our developer relations team here in JFrog, and that's, as you already know by now, the best job ever, because I get to do this podcasting with Ken Kousen, among of other things, and it's great to work with developers and help them solve their problems. So we're still hiring. Take a look at join.jfrog.com and let me know.
And OCI, I believe, is still hiring as well. I don't have an actual post, to point to a job.
Oh, they always hire. They always hire.
Yep. I mean, but it's just such a contrast from the way Pivotal handled it. Remember, the Pivotal had 3 Groovy developers and 3 Grails developers, and OCI already has 14, and they're still hiring.
Exactly.
We wish them all the best, of course. Anything else in here? Well, GreatConf in the U.S. is July 25th through 27th. I missed the submission deadline, but I contacted the powers that be, and I do believe I will get to go and say something there. Will you be at that one? I mean, you may not know yet.
No, I still don't know.
Yeah. So, but we're looking. I always look forward to that one. I was really sad to miss it last year. So this year,
I really hope I will be able to go, because that's it's great. Doing crazy stuff. Dan Woods is there. It's great.
That's a bug and a feature, I suppose. On that. Okay. We even though the website's down, we have to thank No Fluff Just Stuff for at least trying to host that.
Trying to host. Yeah.
Hopefully that will be back soon. Of course, thanks to the Groovy Calamari. The Grails Diary's been pretty dormant for a while, but hopefully that will come back at some point. And I think that's everything. Do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up?
I think that's it. It's been a good length of the episode. We've been on air for 40 minutes by now,
something like that.
Yeah. No,
we need to stop. We will talk soon. I've got something scheduled that I hope to release further within a week or so. So there, if Sergio's thinking this is it for another couple of months, no, we're going to have more coming. You can obviously tell I have a week at home.
Yeah. No, you deliver. Yep.
Yeah. And we will talk again as soon as we can fit it into our schedules, whenever that is.
Yep. We will, and again we will try to get Dr. Paul King as soon as possible to record the official reaction for our episode on DevOps Friends. Yep.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. So if he by some chance does listen to this, he'll know we're looking for him, and then he can go hide, I suppose. But we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, we'll try to find him through different channels. Eventually, he will fall into our hands, and there is no escape from there.
There's no escape, right? Okay, well, you take care. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon. Bye bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye bye.